I fix motors for a living. Lawnmowers, generators, outboards, things that break down and need cleaning or a new spark plug. I'm good at it because I don't guess. I take the thing apart, find what's wrong, and put it back together. I'm not a ranger. I'm not a tracker. I know John boats because I grew up around them. I know the east entrance to the Okefenokee because my dad used to take me fishing there when I was 8 or 9. I know the Suwannee Canal and the Chesser Island Boardwalk and how the floating peat mats out there can tremble under your weight like something alive. But I'd never gone deep, never had a reason to. When Charlton County put out the call for volunteers with boats and swamp experience, I signed up because I had both. That was late August. Hot enough that the air felt wet just standing still. The girl went missing on a Saturday. Her name was Aria Holland, 13 years old. Her parents brought her and her little brother out to the Chesser Island homestead for the afternoon. Standard tourist stop. Boardwalk, old house, gators sunning themselves on the canal. Safe as the swamp gets. Ryder Holland told the deputy his daughter had been right by the car. He'd been loading their cooler into the back. Looked away for maybe a minute. She was gone. Kennedy Holland said Aria had been watching videos about swamp lights, floating islands, the kind of thing kids get curious about. She'd asked if they could see the lights that night. Kennedy told her no. They were leaving before dark. Aria's phone pinged near the Suwannee Canal. Not close. Far enough that everyone figured she'd gone after something. A bird, maybe. Or she'd wanted to see the water up close without her parents watching. The first search started that evening. Dogs, drones, a canoe team from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I wasn't part of it yet. I heard about it the same way everyone in Folkestone did, through the volunteer coordinator's text chain and the news van parked outside the refuge entrance. The dogs lost her scent at the edge of a marshy strip behind the boardwalk. The drones saw cypress, blackwater, sawgrass, nothing else. The canoe team found one thing: a muddy handprint on a cypress trunk. Small, child-sized, 7 feet up from the waterline. Too high for a 13-year-old to reach from the ground. I was at the command post the next morning when Annie Parsons played the voicemail. She's a deputy with Charlton County. 40-something, tight bun, the kind of cop who writes everything down and doesn't like speculation. Kennedy Holland had given her Aria's phone records. There was one voicemail, sent about 20 minutes before the phone died. Annie played it on speaker. Most of it was wind, static, the rustle of fabric against the microphone. Then Aria's voice, so quiet I had to lean in. "It sounds like Mom, but don't answer it." Kennedy started crying. She said Aria must have been scared, confused. Maybe she'd heard an echo across the water and thought it was Kennedy calling her back. Annie Parsons wrote it down. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. I didn't say anything either, but I kept listening. After the whisper, there was a pause, then a sound. Hollow, rhythmic, like someone tapping on wet wood. From the inside. Kennedy played it again, then again. She kept asking what the knocking was. Annie said it could have been a woodpecker, a branch hitting a tree, anything. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and listened to that knocking repeat. It didn't sound like a woodpecker. It didn't sound like a branch. Kennedy Holland held the phone close to her chest and asked if anyone thought Aria was still alive. Nobody answered that. I looked past the trucks and tables to the edge of the refuge. The cypress line was dark even in full sun. The water beyond it didn't move. I thought about the handprint 7 feet up. I thought about Aria whispering, "Don't answer it." And I knew I was going back out there. Officer Green stood in the gravel lot at Okefenokee Adventures with a laminated map spread across the hood of his truck. He told us the storms were coming tonight and Aria Holland's window was closing. "I'm accepting volunteers who know boats and can read coordinates," he said. "You stay on marked water. You report your position every 30 minutes. You turn back if the channel gets too narrow to reverse. I raised my hand. So did 4 other people. Green paired me with Ruby Ward. She was younger than me, maybe 29, with dark curly hair tied back and a veterinary clinic logo on her shirt. She'd paddled the refuge before. That put her ahead of most of us. Andrew Mendez got assigned to our group next. Big guy, construction foreman, loud enough that you heard him before you saw him. His cousin Maurice came with him. Maurice was thin and quiet and looked like he wished he'd stayed home. The last man was Raymond Sasser. Raymond said he'd guided hunters and photographers through the Okefenokee for 30 years. He had a laminated map with red lines drawn across it in permanent marker. He told Green he knew cuts through the swamp that weren't on the public trail maps. Green looked at the map. He looked at Raymond. "You stay on marked water," Green said again. "No exceptions." Raymond nodded. I saw the red lines. They crossed blank marsh, where the official map showed nothing but sawgrass and open prairie. We loaded 2 flat-bottomed John boats with paddles, radios, flare kits, extra fuel, first aid bags, and printed photos of Aria. Raymond took the lead boat with Andrew and Maurice. I rowed in the second boat with Ruby. The launch was easy. The Suwannee Canal was wide and black and calm. We called Aria's name along the banks. We checked clumps of brush. We watched gators slide off mud into the water. Andrew joked with Maurice. Ruby steered us steady. Raymond stayed 20 yards ahead, checking his map every few minutes. For the first hour, it felt normal. Then the insects stopped. I noticed it because the sound had been constant since we launched. Cicadas, dragonflies, mosquitoes, all of it humming over the water. Then it cut out like someone had flipped a switch. Ruby noticed too. She looked at me. The frogs went next. I scanned the left bank and saw a line of cypress knees poking up through the shallows. They were all leaning the same direction, toward us. Cypress knees don't bend once they're grown, but these were angled like they'd been pushed. One of them had fresh mud packed around the tip. I steered closer. Ruby leaned over the side. The mud had grooves in it, small grooves, finger-shaped. "Raymond," I called forward. He turned in the lead boat. "You seeing this?" He glanced at the knee. He shrugged. "Storms move peat around," he said. "Roots get shoved into weird positions all the time." He pointed ahead. "We're cutting off the canal here." Ruby sat up straight. "Where?" "Through there." He was pointing at a gap between 2 cypress trees. It was narrow, no trail markers, no canoe signs, no opening I could see past the first few yards. Ruby called out, "That's not marked." "It's an old cut," Raymond said. "Trappers used it back in the day. It'll take us toward Chesser Prairie. That's where the search grid ended yesterday. The refuge maps don't show it." "The refuge maps are simplified for tourists." Raymond's voice got hard. "That girl dies if we waste daylight following marked routes." I wanted to turn back. I wanted to radio Green and tell him Raymond was leading us off trail. I reached for the radio. Static crackled through the speaker. Then a voice came through, clear and close. "Abby, sweetheart, come back to the car." It was Kennedy Holland. Ruby went still. She stared at the radio like it had bitten her. Kennedy was supposed to be at the command post, miles away, on the east side of the refuge. "Channel carries sound funny over water," Raymond said. He was already turning the lead boat into the gap. "Let's move." Andrew and Maurice followed him in. Ruby looked at me. I looked at the radio. The voice faded. The static came back. I didn't know what else to do, so I steered us into the gap. The cypress closed in on both sides. The water turned darker. The gap bent left, then right, then opened into a run so narrow the boats had maybe 3 feet of clearance. Raymond kept going. Ruby didn't say anything, but her hand stayed on the radio. Kennedy Holland's voice didn't come back. The trees leaned over us. The water stopped moving. We slid into the unmarked run while the radio hissed and went quiet. We kept going. The cypress pressed in tighter. Branches scraped the sides of both boats. Raymond leaned forward over the bow like he was reading something in the water that nobody else could see. Ruby called his name twice before he turned around. "Just watching the depth," he said. I didn't believe him. Andrew stood up in the lead boat and pointed. Something pale was wedged in the fork of a cypress about 10 feet ahead. Too high to reach from the ground, too bright to be bark. Raymond slowed his motor. Andrew grabbed a paddle and hooked the thing with the blade. It was a backpack. Pink, child-sized, covered in mud. Andrew hauled it into the boat and set it on the bench between him and Maurice. The outside was filthy, smeared with gray clay and bits of sawgrass. But when he unzipped it, the inside was dry. "How's that dry?" Ruby said. Nobody answered. Andrew pulled out an inhaler first, then a granola wrapper, then a phone in a plastic bag. The phone was dead. When Andrew wiped the screen, I saw a smear of mud across the glass. It looked like lips. Maurice leaned forward. "Maybe she climbed up there to get away from a gator." Ruby looked up at the tree. No broken branches, no shoe marks, no scrapes in the bark. "Then how'd it get up there?" "I don't know." I looked down at the water around the cypress. It was moving, slow circles like something stirring it from underneath, but there wasn't any current. Andrew shoved Maurice's shoulder. "Quit looking so spooked, man." Maurice jerked sideways. His hand slipped off the gunwale. He tipped over the side and landed with a wet slap on what I thought was open water. Except he didn't sink. He landed on a flat patch of mud covered in duckweed, solid enough to hold him. Andrew laughed. Maurice started to push himself up. Then the whole patch shivered. Ripples passed through it in rings. Not like water, like skin. Maurice froze. Every cypress knee along the edge of the patch opened at the top, wet, dark inside, like mouths. A voice came from 3 of them at once. Arya's voice, whispering. "Don't answer it." Something beneath the duckweed pushed upward, a long ridge, like a spine surfacing under fabric. Maurice scrambled toward the boat. His hands sank into the mud up to the wrists. Gray fibers, thin as fishing line, wrapped around his boot. I grabbed his left arm. Ruby grabbed his right. Andrew hooked the paddle under Maurice's belt and yanked. We hauled him back. The fibers tightened. His boot stayed behind, standing upright in the mud like he was still wearing it. Then it collapsed inward. Pale slime filled it. Something solid rolled out onto the duckweed. A fingernail. Human. Not Maurice's. Raymond's voice cracked. "Back up, now." Andrew twisted around and pulled the starter cord on his motor. It coughed, died. He pulled again. I looked behind us. The opening we'd come through was gone. Sawgrass and peat had filled the channel. Solid, thick. It looked like ground you could walk on. Ruby saw it too. "Raymond." He didn't answer. "Raymond, where's the way out?" "It was right there." "It's not there now." Maurice was shaking. Ruby pulled his foot onto her lap and rolled up his pant leg. A ring of burns circled his ankle where the fibers had touched him. The skin underneath looked soft, digested. I checked my phone. No signal. The GPS dot spun in place, trying to find satellites. Andrew got his motor running. The propeller churned for 3 seconds, then seized with a grinding sound. He killed it and tilted the motor up. The intake was packed with black root fibers, fine, strong, woven tight as rope. I checked mine. Same thing. Raymond stared at the blocked channel behind us. His hands were shaking on the tiller. Ruby's voice went flat. "You said you knew this route." "I do." "Then where are we?" "Southwest of the canal, maybe a mile." "Show me the map." He pulled the laminated sheet from under his seat and held it up. Red lines crossed blank marsh. No trail names, no grid numbers. "Where'd you get this?" Ruby said. "My uncle. He logged out here in the 70s. "Your uncle?" "He knew every cut in the refuge." "Raymond." Ruby leaned forward. "Have you ever been out here before?" He didn't answer right away. "Raymond." "Not this far." Andrew turned around. "What?" "I guided tourists, main canal, boardwalk routes, but the old trails are still here. They have to be." "You lied." "I didn't lie. I said I knew the swamp." "You said you'd guided hunters and photographers." "I have, just not here." Raymond's jaw tightened. "That girl's dying while we sit on marked water waiting for dogs that can't find her. Somebody had to try something." Maurice whispered, "We should walk." I looked at him. His face was pale, sweating. "Walk where?" I said. "Across the mats, back to the canal." "You just fell through one." That was different. The peat behind us looks solid. "It looks solid because it wants you to think it's solid." "We can test it first." I pointed at his empty boot, still sinking slowly into the duckweed. "That's the test." The knocking started again. Hollow, rhythmic, moving through the cypress knees ahead of us in a wave. Each one answered the next. Tap, tap, tap. Then voices. Ryder Holland shouted Arya's name from somewhere to the left. Kennedy sobbed from the right. Officer Green's voice came from directly ahead, flat and clear. "Report your position now." Ruby's hands tightened on the gunwale. The knocking kept going, knee to knee. Ahead of us, behind us. Officer Green's voice repeated, "Report your position now." Exactly the same, every word, every pause, like something playing it back. The channel opened into a prairie. It wasn't on Raymond's map, it wasn't on the refuge map either, just a round bowl of black water and sawgrass, maybe 200 yards across, ringed by cypress that leaned inward like they were watching something in the middle. And in the middle floated an island. I'd seen floating islands before. The Okefenokee was famous for them, batteries of peat and roots thick enough to hold trees, drifting wherever the water pushed them. This one looked like that at first. Cypress, palmetto, wax myrtle, all growing dense across its back. Big, too, maybe the size of a football field. Except it was moving against the wind. I watched the trees. They didn't sway random. They leaned inward, all of them, like spokes on a wheel. And along the edges, where the peat met the water, cypress knees rose and fell in a rhythm. Up, down, like something breathing. Ruby saw it too. She stopped polling. "Atlas," she said. I didn't answer. I was looking at the aluminum canoe stuck halfway into the peat on the near side, old, dented. And next to it, a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service boundary sign, angled like it had been ripped from somewhere else and dragged here. Near the sign was a pink sneaker. It had a plastic butterfly charm on the laces. Ruby pulled us closer, slow, careful. The water around the island didn't move right. No current, but it rippled in rings that spread outward from the hammock like something underneath was shifting. She leaned out and grabbed the sneaker. It was dry inside. Then Arya screamed. The sound came from deep in the hammock, high and sharp and cut off fast. Raymond stood up in the lead boat. "She's in there," he said. "Sinkhole, root pocket. She fell through and got stuck." I shook my head. "The whole thing's moving." "It's peat. Peat moves." "Not like that." Ruby was staring at the cypress knees. They'd stopped rising, all of them, like the island was holding still to listen. I pulled the radio off my belt. "We need to call this in. Get our position logged before anyone steps on that thing." I keyed the mic. Static crackled. Then Arya's voice came through, thin and hollow. "I'm cold under the trees." Ruby dropped the sneaker. Raymond looked at the radio like it had bitten him. Maurice made a sound in his throat that wasn't quite a word. I let go of the mic. The radio kept hissing. Andrew stood up in the lead boat. His face was red. His hands were shaking. "She's right there," he said. "Andrew, wait." He jumped. The peat held. For a second I thought maybe Raymond was right. Maybe it was just an island. Andrew took a step, then another. The ground didn't give. He crossed 10 yards, pushing through palmetto and low brush, and then he stopped. "I see her." He dropped to his knees. I couldn't see what he was looking at from the boat. Just Andrew, bent over something in a shallow depression between the palmettos. Then he reached down and I saw her. Arya. She was lying on her back in the mud, wrapped in black roots from the shoulders down. Her face was pale. Her lips were cracked. Thin fibers ran from the peat into her ears, into the corners of her mouth, like the island was feeding something into her. Andrew grabbed her shoulder. Arya opened her eyes. Her mouth moved. No sound, just her lips shaping 2 words. "Don't talk." Andrew shouted, "We found her! She's right here!" Every cypress knee on the island snapped toward him. The peat split. It didn't crack like dirt. It tore, wet and slow, opening in a seam that ran from the stuck canoe all the way to Andrew's knees. Under it wasn't soil. It was something pale and slick, stretched tight like a drum skin. Veins ran through it, thick as ropes, pulsing. Andrew tried to stand. The ground softened under him. He sank to one knee, then both. His boots disappeared into the split. "Rope!" he yelled. I grabbed the coil from the bottom of the boat and threw it. Andrew caught it, wrapped it around his wrist. I pulled. Ruby grabbed the line behind me. Maurice leaned over and added his weight. The island pulled harder. Andrew's legs went first. He clawed at the peat, at the palmetto roots, at anything. The split widened into a circle around him. The edges curled inward. I saw ridges inside, dark and hard, like cypress roots worn smooth by water. But they weren't roots. Andrew screamed. It was his voice. I heard it. Then it broke apart and came out of the cypress knees around us, all at once, multiplied and hollow and wrong. The rope went slack. I fell backward into Ruby. Maurice hit the side of the boat. The line dragged through my hands, burning, and when I pulled it back in, there was nothing on the end but Andrew's glove. Still tied, still knotted. The cypress knees kept screaming. Raymond grabbed the gunwale and shoved. His boat scraped sideways against mine. He was trying to push us away from the hammock. Ruby yelled at him to stop. The roots didn't let him. They came up out of the water like black cables, dripping, wrapping around both sterns in loops that tightened with a wet creak. The same fibers that had clogged the motors. They lashed the boats to the island, stern to shore, and when Raymond pulled his hands back, one of the loops had already circled his wrist. Arya choked. I looked up and saw her head jerk backward. The fibers at her throat were pulling tighter. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out except a thin whistle. Ruby was already moving. She yanked the first aid kit open, dumped half of it into the boat, and pulled out a folding pruning saw with a red plastic handle. She didn't ask. She just stepped onto the hammock. The peat held. I grabbed the flare kit and the 5-gallon fuel can and followed her. The ground felt wrong under my boots. Soft, but not mud soft. It gave a little with each step, like walking on something that was holding its breath. The cypress knees around us stood motionless. I could hear Maurice behind me, still in the boat, sawing at the roots with his fishing knife. He was whispering something. Prayers, maybe. I couldn't make out the words. Raymond was still talking. "There has to be a channel on the far side. My map shows one." I looked back at him. He had the laminated map spread across his lap, tracing one of the red lines with a shaking finger. The line ran straight through blank marsh and ended in open water that wasn't there. His map was useless. The island had shifted everything around us. Ruby dropped to her knees next to Aria and started cutting. The saw was small, meant for pruning branches, but the teeth bit into the black fibers and they split with a smell like burnt hair. She went for the mouth first. Aria's lips were blue. Her eyes rolled toward Ruby and stayed there. The fiber at her throat snapped. Aria coughed. Gray water came up, thin and full of sediment. She sucked in air and coughed again. Ruby kept cutting, working down toward the roots wrapped around Aria's shoulders. I knelt on the other side and set the fuel can down. My hands were shaking. I opened the flare kit and checked the igniters. 3 left. Aria's voice came out small and hoarse. It used my mom's voice. Ruby didn't stop cutting. "We know, honey." It called me off the trail. It sounded exactly like her. Aria coughed again. It dragged me through the water inside the roots. It let me breathe when it wanted me alive. I looked at the fibers Ruby was cutting. They weren't just wrapped around Aria. Some of them went into her. I could see the tips disappearing under her jaw, behind her ears. "There are other people inside it," Aria whispered. "Some of them are still talking after they should be dead." Ruby's hands stopped. Aria kept going. "It learns voices through the roots, the ones it pushes into your ears and throat. It listens to you while you're still alive because living voices sound more convincing." Maurice made a noise behind us. Not a word, just a sound. I turned and saw him still sawing at the roots, holding the boat. His face was pale. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Then the woman's voice called from the far side of the hammock. "Raymond." Soft, tired, like someone who'd been waiting a long time. Raymond's head snapped up. "Raymond, I'm here." He stood. The root around his wrist pulled taut, but he didn't seem to notice. I knew what was coming. I could feel it the same way I'd felt the handprint on the cypress trunk was wrong. "Don't answer." Raymond wasn't listening. His face had gone slack. "That's Patricia." "It's not." "That's my wife." His voice cracked. "She died 5 years ago in Brunswick." "Raymond, don't." He started walking. The cypress knees nearest him bent backward, smooth and slow, like fingers curling. They weren't wood, they were tubes, flexible, coated in bark, opening at the top into wet black holes. Raymond said, "I'm sorry, Patty, I'm so sorry." The tubes punched through him. 3 of them, chest, stomach, side. They went in clean and came out his back, and they didn't pull out. They lifted. Raymond came off the ground with his boots kicking and his mouth open. No sound, just a wet gasp and then nothing. The tubes held him there for 2 seconds. Then they pulled him down. He sank into the peat like it was water. One hand stayed up, fingers spread, and then that went under too. The surface smoothed over. The only thing left was a dark stain and the smell of torn earth. The radio in Maurice's boat crackled. Raymond's voice came through, calm, even. "Officer Green, this is Raymond. We're fine. We're moving back toward the canal now." Maurice dropped his knife. Ruby pulled Aria free and dragged her backward across the peat. I stood there with the flare kit in one hand and the fuel can in the other, staring at the place where Raymond's hand had been. The cypress knees started to turn toward us. I grabbed the fuel can and splashed gasoline across the cypress knees between Abby and the boats. The fumes made my eyes water. Ruby saw what I was doing. She dragged Abby backward through the mud and kept cutting. Maurice was in the rear boat, sawing at the roots with his fishing knife. The fibers around the stern were thick as electrical cable. He got one hand under the loop and pulled. The root cinched. It happened too fast for him to yell. The loop closed around his fingers and the motor bracket like a wire through cheese. 2 fingers dropped into the bilge water. Maurice made a sound I'd never heard a person make before. Ruby shouted his name but didn't stop cutting Abby free. I pulled the flare gun from the kit. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The cypress knees bent toward me, all of them at once. I fired into the gasoline. The flame guttered blue for half a second. Then it caught with a deep whoosh that ran through the tubes like they were hollowed out inside. Fire poured under the peat in veins I could see through the cracks. The whole island arched upward. I went down hard. Ruby fell across Abby. The cypress trees tilted outward and the peat split in long seams that opened like cuts in skin. Underneath was the thing itself. Flat, pale, wider than both boats put together, segmented like the underside of a horseshoe crab, with hundreds of black root tubes running along its edges like fringe, and in the center a circular mouth packed with broken canoe ribs, animal bones, and pieces of orange life jacket that had been ground down to strips. It wasn't hiding under a floating island. It was the island. The trees, the palmettos, the peat. All of it was camouflage grown across its back, probably over decades. I stared at it and understood we'd been standing on a living thing the whole time. The fire forced the tubes to pull inward. When they did, the roots holding the boats went slack. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed Abby under the arms and dragged her toward the freed boat. Ruby was already hauling Maurice over the side by his good arm. He was pale and shaking, and his hand was wrapped in his shirt, but he was moving. The burning island rolled sideways. A wave rose up and flipped the second John boat like it was made of cardboard. Raymond's laminated map floated for a second, then got sucked into the mouth with a wet crunch. Andrew's voice came from under the flames, begging for help, not his real voice. The thing still had his voice. Abby covered her ears and started crying. I shoved a paddle into the mud and pushed us away from the creature. Ruby got the fuel line back on the motor and yanked the starter cord. Once, twice. It caught. The island thrashed behind us, and the channel that had been blocked opened up like a curtain pulling back. Ruby gunned the throttle, and we shot through the gap. I didn't know where we were going. The channel we'd come through was gone, replaced by sawgrass and black water that all looked the same. Ruby sat in the bow with the pruning saw still in one hand, scanning left and right like she was waiting for the next attack. Maurice hunched over his ruined hand, whispering something I couldn't hear. Aria lay curled in the bottom of the boat between us, eyes half open, breathing shallow. I steered toward the smoke. It rose in a dark column above the sawgrass, maybe half a mile ahead, bending east with the wind. I figured if anyone at the boardwalk or the observation platform had seen it, they'd call it in. Fire crews would move toward smoke. Rangers would move toward smoke. I just had to keep the boat pointed at it and hope the channel didn't close behind us again. The voices started about 2 minutes after we cleared the burning island. Ruby's name first. Her head snapped up. The voice came from a cypress knee 20 yards to our left, clear and loud like someone shouting across water. "Ruby, wait up." It was Andrew's voice. Not similar, not close. Andrew. Ruby's jaw tightened. She didn't answer. The voice moved to the next knee, closer now. "Ruby, come on, I'm stuck back here." Maurice made a sound in his throat. I kept my eyes on the smoke column and my hand on the tiller. Then Raymond's voice came from the right, calm and steady like he was giving directions. "Turn around, you're going the wrong way." I didn't turn around. The voices hopped from knee to knee, following us through the channel. They stayed just behind the boat, pacing us, Andrew called Ruby's name again. Raymond told me the canal was back the other way. Then Kennedy's voice rose over both of them, high and breaking. "Abby, sweetheart, come back." Aria flinched, her eyes squeezed shut. Kennedy's voice got louder, more desperate. "Abby, please, come back to the car." Ruby looked down at Aria, then at me. Her face was pale. I kept steering toward the smoke. The voices layered over each other now, coming from knees on both sides of the channel. Andrew begged Ruby to help him. Raymond ordered me to stop the boat. Kennedy sobbed Aria's name. They sounded real. They sounded exactly like the people they'd been. Aria's lips moved. I leaned closer. "None of them are real," she whispered. I nodded. Ruby heard it too and turned back toward the bow, gripping the pruning saw like it could cut voices. The motor coughed. I felt it stutter under my hand, felt the propeller lose bite. The boat slowed. The voices got closer. "Ruby, I can see you. Just wait." The motor died. I yanked the starter cord. Nothing. Yanked it again. The engine turned over once and quit. Ruby grabbed a paddle. I grabbed the other one. Maurice tried to help with his good hand, but he was shaking too hard. Blood dripped from the bandage Ruby had wrapped around his missing fingers, pooling in the bottom of the boat near Aria's shoulder. We paddled. The voices kept coming. Andrew's laugh, Raymond's instructions, Kennedy's pleading. They moved through the knees in rhythm, like something was pushing sound through tubes, playing it back in sequence. My arms burned. Ruby's paddle hit the water in time with mine, pulling us forward through the black channel. The smoke column stayed ahead of us, closer now. I could smell it, sharp and chemical, like burning plastic mixed with wet wood. The water widened. The sawgrass thinned. The channel opened into something broader, and I saw posts. Wooden posts with faded orange markers, the kind the refuge used to mark the main canal routes. The Suwannee Canal. Ruby saw them too. She didn't say anything, just paddled harder. The voices fell back. Andrew called one more time, fainter now, from somewhere deep in the sawgrass. Then they stopped. I heard an engine. Not ours. Something bigger, deeper, coming from the direction of the boardwalk. I looked up and saw the airboat cutting across the canal toward us, its big fan throwing spray, a Fish and Wildlife Service flag whipping from the roll cage. Officer Green stood at the helm. The airboat slowed as it got close. Green throttled down and let it drift the last 20 feet. His face was tight, controlled, but his eyes moved over the boat fast, taking inventory. Aria in the bottom, pale and muddy. Maurice hunched over his hand, blood-soaked bandage. Ruby covered in swamp muck and someone else's blood. Me with burns across both palms and black root fibers still stuck to my jeans. Green's airboat nosed against ours beside the marked posts of the Suwannee Canal. The airboat ride back to the east entrance took 40 minutes. Officer Green didn't ask questions. He kept one hand on the throttle and the other on his radio, calling ahead for medical transport and fire crews. I sat on the wet deck with Aria propped against my chest, wrapped in a foil emergency blanket that crackled every time she shivered. Ruby held Maurice's good hand while his other arm dripped blood through a towel packed around the stumps where his fingers had been. None of us said anything. The roar of the fan made conversation impossible, and I was grateful for that. When we reached the boat ramp, 2 Charlton County ambulances were already waiting. Paramedics loaded Aria first. Kennedy ran from the command tent before anyone could stop her and climbed into the back of the ambulance, sobbing Aria's name over and over. Ryder stood at the edge of the parking lot with his arms crossed, staring at his daughter like he couldn't believe she was real. Maurice went in the second ambulance. Ruby and I rode with him because neither of us wanted to be separated yet. They took us to Memorial Satilla Health in Waycross. The emergency room smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. A doctor cleaned my hands, wrapped them in gauze, and told me I'd be fine. Ruby had rope burns across both palms and a shallow cut on her forearm from the pruning saw. Maurice needed surgery to close the sheared bone and tissue where the root had taken his fingers. Aria stayed 3 floors up in pediatric observation while doctors worked on her throat and ears. Annie Parsons arrived around 8 that evening. She set up in a conference room near the cafeteria and called us in one at a time. Ruby went first, then Maurice, once they'd finished his surgery and the anesthetic wore off enough for him to talk. Then me. Annie had a yellow legal pad, a digital recorder, and a look on her face that told me she'd already decided most of what I was going to say wouldn't make it into any official report. She started the recorder. "Walk me through what happened after you left the main canal." I did. I kept my voice steady and my details exact. I told her about the narrow run Raymond had led us into, the backpack in the tree, Maurice falling onto the floating mat, the boot that wasn't empty when it came off. I told her about the round prairie and the hammock covered in cypress and palmetto. I told her we found Aria alive with roots in her mouth and ears. I told her Andrew stepped onto the island and it swallowed him. I told her Raymond heard his dead wife's voice and answered it. I told her I poured gasoline on the cypress knees and lit them with a flare because it was the only way to make the thing let go. Annie wrote without looking up. When I finished, she clicked her pen twice and said, "The thing." "Yes, ma'am." "You're saying the island was alive?" "I'm saying it moved. I'm saying it dragged Aria through the swamp and kept her inside it for 2 days. I'm saying it killed Andrew and Raymond right in front of us." "And you burned it?" "Part of it. Enough to get Aria out." Annie leaned back in her chair. "Fish and Wildlife sent a crew out this afternoon. They didn't find any burned hammock. They didn't find a round prairie. They didn't find the channel you described." "It moves," I said. "That's what I'm telling you." "Pete Islands drift sometimes, but they don't hunt people, Mr. Porter." I looked at my bandaged hands. "Then how do you explain what happened to Maurice's fingers?" "Entanglement injury. Root fibers under tension can amputate digits if they snap back suddenly. It's documented." "And Andrew?" "Missing. Presumed drowned or attacked after the boat accident." "There was no boat accident," I said. "The island held the boats. It pulled them in with roots." Annie set her pen down. "I'm writing what I can verify. Peat fire, narrow channel, disorientation, possible alligator involvement, 2 men missing. 1 girl recovered alive. That's the report." I wanted to argue. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and make her listen, but I could see it in her eyes. She'd heard me. She'd written it all down. She just wasn't going to call it what it was. "What about Aria?" I asked. "What did she tell you?" "Miss Holland is a traumatized child. She's confused and frightened. She'll need time to process what happened." "Did she tell you the same thing I just told you?" Annie didn't answer. I stood up. "You should close that part of the refuge. Not for a few days. Permanently." "The closure is temporary while we conduct search and recovery operations." "You won't recover anything," I said. "It already moved." Annie looked at me for a long moment. Then she stopped the recorder and said, "Get some rest, Mr. Porter. You've been through a lot." I left the conference room and went back upstairs. Ruby was sitting in the hallway outside Aria's room, drinking vending machine coffee that had gone cold. She looked up when I sat down beside her. "How'd it go?" she asked. "She thinks we got lost and panicked." Ruby nodded slowly. "She asked me if Raymond had been drinking. She asked if Andrew might have fallen in and we didn't see it happen because of the smoke." "Did you tell her what we saw?" I told her the truth. I don't think it mattered. We sat there for a while without talking. Kennedy came out of Aria's room around 9:30, moving like she hadn't slept in a week. She looked at us and tried to smile. "She's resting," Kennedy said. "They gave her something to help her sleep." "How is she?" Ruby asked. Kennedy's smile collapsed. "They pulled things out of her. Little black threads. The doctor said they'd never seen anything like it. They sent samples to a lab in Atlanta. "She's going to be okay," I said, even though I didn't know if that was true. Kennedy nodded and wiped her eyes. "Thank you. Both of you. I don't know how to—" Her voice broke. She covered her mouth and walked quickly toward the elevators. Ruby watched her go. "We should have found her sooner." "We found her alive," I said. "That's more than most people get." Ruby didn't answer. The third night, I was still there. I'd gone home once to shower and change clothes, but I couldn't stay away. Ruby had gone back to Waycross to check on her dog and get some sleep, but she'd called twice to ask if Arya was talking yet. Maurice was one floor down, recovering from his surgery and refusing visitors except his cousin's parents, who'd driven up from Valdosta and hadn't stopped crying since they arrived. I sat in the hallway with my back against the wall, drinking bad coffee and staring at the fluorescent lights. Kennedy was inside with Arya. Ryder had gone to get food from a drive-thru somewhere. The hall was quiet except for the distant beep of a heart monitor and the low murmur of a television in another room. Then I heard Kennedy scream. I was on my feet and through the door before I'd processed the sound. Ruby appeared from around the corner half a second later, still holding her phone. Kennedy stood beside Arya's bed with both hands over her mouth. Ruby's paper cup hit the floor and spilled water across the tile. Arya sat upright in the hospital bed, staring at me with tears streaming down her face. "Can I have water?" she asked. The voice wasn't hers. It was Andrew's, deep and rough and unmistakable. Arya's mouth kept moving, forming words she didn't want to say. Her hands clawed at her throat like she could pull the sound out. Kennedy backed into the corner, shaking her head over and over. I stepped closer to the bed. "Arya, it's okay. You're safe." Arya looked at me with so much fear in her eyes I thought she'd start screaming. Then her lips moved again, and Raymond's voice came out, low and calm and wrong. "It moved closer to the boardwalk after you burned it." Ruby grabbed my arm. Kennedy made a sound like she'd been punched. Arya lay back down, still crying, and the voices stopped. But I could see her mouth trembling, trying not to open, trying not to let anything else out. I stood there staring at her, and I understood what the island had done. It hadn't just learned her voice, it had left pieces of itself inside her. And now she was carrying Andrew and Raymond and God knows who else in her throat, trapped and speaking and wrong. Arya Holland lay in the hospital bed crying while Raymond Sasser's voice came from her mouth. Officer Green locked the pedestrian gate at the Chesser Island boardwalk the next morning. I watched him thread the chain through the metal bars and snap the padlock shut. My hands still had bandages where the rope had burned them. Maurice's blood was still under my fingernails. I'd tried scrubbing it out in the hospital bathroom, but it had dried too deep. Green hammered a temporary closure sign into the post beside the gate. The sign said, "Maintenance work." It didn't say anything about the island or the voices or the two men who weren't coming back. "You should go home," Green said. I nodded. I didn't move. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he got back in his truck and drove toward the ranger station. I heard the engine fade down the access road. After that, it was just the swamp sounds. Cicadas. A woodpecker working somewhere in the cypress. Normal things. I walked to the edge of the boardwalk and looked out over the water. The search party hadn't gone into a hidden part of the Okefenokee by mistake. That's what I kept thinking about. We hadn't found some lost corner of the refuge that nobody knew about. The hidden part had come to us. It wore trees and mud on its back. It moved through the swamp carrying the voices of everyone it had swallowed, and it used those voices to pull more people in. Andrew was in there now. Raymond, too. Maybe others from years back, people who disappeared on solo canoe trips or hunting expeditions and never turned up. The island had their voices. It could use them whenever it wanted. And Arya still had pieces of it inside her. The doctors had pulled out fibers, They'd cleaned her throat and checked her ears and said she was stable, but last night she'd asked for water in Andrew's voice, deep and rough and wrong, coming from a 13-year-old girl. Then Raymond's voice had come next, whispering that the island had moved closer to the boardwalk after we burned it. Kennedy had screamed. Ruby had dropped the cup she was holding. I'd stood there in the hospital room doorway watching Arya cry because she couldn't control what was coming out of her mouth. The doctors said it was trauma, psychological mimicry, stress-induced voice changes. I knew better. I turned away from the water and walked back to my truck. The east entrance parking lot was empty except for Green's vehicle near the office and one other car that probably belonged to a ranger doing paperwork. No tourists, no families, no kids with butterfly charms on their sneakers. I climbed into the cab and sat there with the windows down. The air smelled like peat and cypress bark and something faintly sweet that I couldn't name. I started the engine, put it in reverse, stopped. Through the trees, I could see the edge of the boardwalk, the locked gate, the closure sign. I thought about Arya's handprint 7 feet up that cypress trunk. I thought about the boot standing upright in the mud before it collapsed. I thought about Andrew's glove still tied to the rope, empty. I put the truck back in park. The swamp was quiet, too quiet, the way it had been right before Raymond let us off the main canal. No frogs, no insects, just the woodpecker, still tapping somewhere I couldn't see. Then the woodpecker stopped. I waited. The knock came from underneath the boardwalk. Just one. Hollow and wet, like someone tapping on wood from the inside. I sat there listening. It didn't come again. After a long time, I put the truck in gear and drove back toward Folkestone. In the rearview mirror, the boardwalk stood empty behind the locked gate. The closure sign tilted slightly in the breeze. The knock didn't repeat, but I knew it would.